This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Gil will join us shortly. First, though, please, if you like our content and there's a way for you to express that like via a button, have at it. Better yet, subscribe to us. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening, and we're about to take out a new streaming horror black comedy TV series called Are You Afraid? And you definitely want to keep abreast of that.
Flesh-eating ghouls. For a long time, we humans have been deeply afraid of vampires and zombies.
Sin for paramedics.
Fair enough, vampires and zombies are scary. But neither vampires nor zombies
Are real.
Flesh-eating ghouls, on the other hand, are real. They've been living in our shadow for thousands of years, hunting us, feasting on us, treating us
Like food.
But some ghouls are tired of living in the shadow of their food. Those ghouls have decided it's time to leave the shadow.
And put us in our place where we belong.
On the menu,
It's an eat or be eaten world.
Flavored by fear, filled with the monster we should have been afraid of all along.
Flesh-eating ghoul.
Are you afraid?
Better be.
Coming soon.
on the one hand, this episode of the podcast is a sequel to our first chat with Ethan REIFF and VORIS, the longtime screenwriting team who wrote Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight. But on the other, this episode's a whole story unto itself. We'll talk about why there's never been a sequel to Demon Knight, when, in a way, the whole point of making horror movies is to create a sequel factory. From the moment that Demon Knight opened, its audience has been crying out for a sequel, demanding one. Up until this episode of the podcast, if you'd have asked me, will there ever be a sequel to Demon Knight? I'd have given you the same answer we've given for 30 years come January. Well, it's complicated, but no, there will never be a sequel to Demon Knight. Whether times have changed or circumstances have, I'd like to withdraw that no and replace it with a, all things being equal, there could be a sequel to Demon Knight. First, what would it take to make a Demon Knight sequel happen? There are rights issues and assholes. It's Hollywood. And second, if there were to be a sequel, what would the story be? Well, we're going to talk about every last bit of that. And we'll talk about how Cy and Ethan's love of Hong Kong action movies put them in a room at DreamWorks. DreamWorks owned 3 words, Kung Fu Panda, but couldn't figure out what the movie was until Cy and Ethan walked in the room and laid it out for them. And we'll talk about Cy and Ethan's considerable TV of including Brimstone and KNIGHTFALL. Still, as you'll see and hear, we've only just scratched the surface with Ethan and Cy. There's so much more to talk about. But first,
I was watching a prison escape movie from like the 60s last night.
that's the voice of Cy VORIS.
Like a Nazi camp escape.
You were watching The Great Escape?
And the voice of Ethan REIFF.
No, I was watching a more obscure movie called Password. The Password is Courage with
Yeah.
Kurt Bogart. But
Yeah.
it's shocking what all these people got away with in the camps, like the Americans and the British with like secret radios and stuff. And I know it's all documented. And I was thinking, is the only way they could have gotten away with this is because they didn't have like cameras and microphones. They didn't have security apparatus in those days. It's like, these guys are like literally building ham radios and digging tunnels under the noses of like.
They got away with it most of the time. And then when the German jailers called like spot inspections, most of the time stuff got found and they got punished. And then they started from scratch building stuff. I read the book, the memoir, the wartime memoir that movie's based on, which is an incredible book. I've never seen the movie. The biggest thing in the book is when he literally purposefully sneaks into a concentration camp because they've heard rumors that there's like a Jewish British prisoner or Canadian prisoner who's being held in a concentration camp instead of a POW camp because he's a Jew. And he literally breaks into the concentration camp. And if I remember correctly, in the real story, he can't find the guy. And it blows his mind, the conditions and the circumstances.
Yes, and in fact, in reality, the real guy that Dirk Bogarde plays in this British.
I'm telling you, I read the book.
Oh, no, I know. I'm saying I did some more research. He actually testified at Nuremberg.
Oh, yeah.
He was a guy, because everybody else was like from the camps had been liberated. He was a guy who actually went real time because he snuck in. He saw the conditions at the camp when it happened. Now, this movie was apparently a hit in Britain in the 60s, but very mixed reviews, controversial, because it's a very lighthearted, not to the Hogan's Heroes element. And because and now you look back and say, here's a guy who like freed Jews from a concentration camp. And I
don't think he freed anybody.
Oh, he did. He did.
Really?
No, he did. Yes, he did. Because what they did is they took out.
I don't remember that from the real story.
I just did the research. What they did is they took dead bodies of French and Polish prisoners and then took their passports and ID and clothes and gave them to Jewish prisoners to sneak the Jewish prisoners out. But the point is that they made this very light prison escape movie. And the real story is this guy was in Auschwitz and helped people. So even in
he was there for hours or days, not for years.
Oh, but he helped people escape.
He's an incredible hero. I'm just saying.
And apparently, there was an Auschwitz sequence in the last 10 minutes of the movie that they cut out because people were like, you can't suddenly put.
So when I asked you my question, you buried the lead, which is there is no concentration camp element in the movie.
No,
you just did your own research after watching the movie.
Yes.
In your head, it melded into one thing. And when I specifically said, is that element, which is the most memorable element for me of reading the guy's wartime memoir in the movie, you launched into telling us about the real story of him.
Exactly, but here's
not one shot in the movie that you saw.
Yes, but here's why it adds up, because there was.
I didn't say it doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up as a response to my specific.
I am responding, which is that there was a concentration camp sequence in the movie.
But you didn't see it because it wasn't in the movie back in.
I know, but I'm telling you, they filmed it and they cut it out. Because people were like, you can't put Auschwitz in the last 5 minutes of this movie.
That's interesting for this conversation, but it has nothing to do with answering my simple question that I started out answering.
So let me ask Alan a question. I don't want to interrupt you guys. Alan, you want to go for coffee?
Yeah.
We can just
the last thing. Hang on, side.
We can take over the podcast and just argue about this movie for an hour and a half.
Oh my God, please!
It's interesting that it was turned into a generally lighthearted prison. A POW, World War II POW camp movie, because the memoir that I read that the guy actually wrote was not lighthearted at all. I mean, it has its moments, almost like most combat soldier or Marine or airman or Coast Guardsman or whatever memoirs of bits of dark humor, but it was a pretty serious, grim story.
So this film adaptation took some serious tonal liberties. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I don't know. I would say I haven't seen the movie, but it sounds like it struck a different tone. I'm sure there were still life or death stakes, and like Sai said, it isn't as extreme as Hogan's Heroes, but it sounds like it is a different tone. Which there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just interesting.
I realized how did we get on this thread? Because we were talking about surveillance technology in 2020.
Oh yeah, because you were saying it was so lighthearted and fun, and the German authorities didn't know while they were building all these secret communications equipment. And if they had modern technology like these guys have to record their podcast.
Exactly. We bring it all back around. There you go. It's a circuitous route, but we do get there eventually.
And so here we are.
By way of circuitous routes, here we are.
Well, what is it? 5 minutes later?
Yeah, you're gonna cut all that out, right, Al? That's
If you listen to the last time that we all sat down, no, no, I
well,
why
that's
would
your
I?
prerogative. That's your prerogative.
Oh my God! To me, this is all gold.
Hey, is that a Bordello of Blood poster on the wall behind you, Alan?
It is.
Cool.
One that has taken much abuse.
Aw.
Yeah, it's sad
Notice
for-
I don't have one hanging behind me.
Yeah, no, mine sat for a very long time in a garage, in the back part of a garage, and I didn't give a fuck what happened to it.
Oh, there you go.
That's interesting. So like it literally, as you did your own like healing from whatever negative aspects of that experience, that poster's like the physical manifestation of the trauma and the healing. And now
Yes.
I would never have known that it had been in a damp, mildewed corner of a garage or dusty corner of a garage, because it looks proudly good on the wall. You know,
proudly displayed on the wall.
If you were standing here in the office and you looked at it, you go, "Oh my God!" Yeah, it is.
Well,
Yeah,
the blood is real blood.
Yes, it is. Those are real spatters. Anyway, so I'm so glad that you guys agreed to continue our conversation, because we did not really, we just scratched the surface. We got to that boring story about Demon Knight and left out so much of life outside and after Demon Knight. Demon Knight helped.
Demon Knight was really our breakthrough to the studio level, you know.
And actually, our first
still sort of must exist. Like people must go from, you know, doing cell phone movies or straight to streaming movies to being hired for an assignment or selling something original to the movie studios that remain.
And actually, yes, our first studio writing job, we were hired by the Universal executive on Demon Knight, Nina. Oh my God, I'm blanking her name.
Nina Jacobson.
Nina Jacobson, who went
on to work at Amblin.
And a big producer. She became a huge
DreamWorks.
Producer. Yeah, a huge producer. She hired us from Demon Knight and
to become a huge producer,
to write a movie for her for Universal that never got made, but it was great. That was like, oh, we got our first actual studio job, you know, where here's an idea, you pitch something, they say that's great, they pay you to write it. It was like, wow. So
I think it was a rewrite. I think it was a page one rewrite. I think they had a script, and you know, or they had several drafts of the script, and then they hired us to do a new.
Funny, I remember suddenly conversations with Nina about the script, and she was a huge fan of yours.
Oh,
no, she was great.
That makes perfect sense.
She really was.
Well, also, what was important about Demon Knight, ironically, is when we started getting into television, because we had written Demon Knight, everybody wanted us to create a horror show. Because initially we had done, because the X-Files had broken and that was big.
Here, alas, we froze for a second. Cy was telling the story of taking something other than a horror movie pitch into a studio pitch where a horror movie was expected.
Yeah, that's great. But you guys worked on the Tales of the Crypt movie. We want a horror series from you guys. And so after a while, if enough people tell you you're drunk, you're probably drunk. So we were sort of like, well, are we crazy? We should come up with a horror show. Mm-hmm. And that was our first, that ironically was our first television project.
Yeah, that's sort of true.
Brimstone.
That's sort of true. If you dig a little further below the surface, it was several years later. And because of Demon Knight, we had done a bunch of other feature horror assignments, actually. So we had like a list of credits that would precede us when we would show up on this first attempt to sell our first TV pitch, which, like Cy says, was a kind of like a Mission Impossible action thriller.
But this certainly got you all that you had heft, you had legitimacy in the eye of the executive.
Well, we had enough heft and legitimacy to be able to go, and you know, the doors would be open to hear our pitch, but we would pitch the show, and what they would say to us was, yeah, that violates one of the fundamental tenets of network television, which is no foreign content.
Which was back in the day.
This is like 1997 or 98. And I remember I would say to them, my response was, well, but if you boil down the essence, this show that we're pitching you to its essence, it's basically a bunch of Americans in white hats going overseas to kick the ass of a bunch of various different foreigners in black hats. Does that really violate the tenets of network? And they were like, yeah, it's just about people don't like to go overseas.
The answer is in the late 90s, it did violate all the television.
Yeah. And
rules.
So then they would, like Cy says, it wasn't really about Demon Knight. It was about, oh, you guys, you did this thing. Demon Knight, you did, we had sold this other big script called Slayer. You did, whatchamacallit, you did a draft of a version of the latest version of Freddy versus Jason.
Had we done that? Had we done that at that point?
Yes, we had racked up a ton of horror credits. And also this other project that was made, I think, years later by a different director and production team than had hired us, but this project called The Gathering. And they were all like high level, you know, A or B, because they were horror genre, major studio projects, and they were horror. And so, like Cy says, they looked at that, and what had happened was, I mean, maybe, I don't know, did you just mention this? I don't think so. Like the Scream aspect.
Can I go back? Can I go back half a step?
Because but Cy mentioned X-Files, I think, and maybe, I don't know if you mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer was another big one, and then the last thing was Scream had just come out, and as you guys know as well as anybody, the horror genre had basically been MIA, bordering on dead, until Scream came out, and then everybody wanted horror. And so we went into all these meetings, like I said, we gave them our pitch. They were impressed by us, our credits, and even the way we pitched, but our pitch violated a fundamental tenet of network programming. And they said, like Cy just quoted, hey, we'd love to be in business with you guys if you come back with a horror show. And like he said, we literally, it was one day. We went to the first meeting, that's what they said. Went to the second meeting, that's what they said. We went to lunch, went to the third meeting after lunch, that's what they said. We went to like maybe a fourth meeting, that's what they said. And then we looked at each other when we left. We're like, fuck this is ridiculous. We should just pitch them a horror show. Yeah.
I do want to jump in and say that one of the things I always thought about, because Ethan says there was that period where horror, at least in mainstream studios, was sort of dead until Scream came out. And I always thought that the Tales from the Crypt, essentially buying and producing Demon Knight was a good thing, but a double-edged sword, because the great thing is that was like the only horror game in town theatrically at that period in the 90s. So the fact that that script got bought by you guys and made under the umbrella of Tales of the Crypt means it got a bigger budget and a theatrical feature. But had we sold Demon Knight, or had it been made on a smaller budget straight to video, it would have not gotten a theatrical release. But Ethan and I joked that we would have done like 7 Demon Knight sequels by now, all like straight to video. You know, it would have been a whole one of those weird mini franchises.
Yeah.
Like,
Is that not the biggest question?
It might have gotten a small theatrical release at the start. I think most of those movies, if they were back then at a certain level, you know, if you think back to the genre films that got a limited theatrical release just in order to qualify for whatever the financial end of their video release was, you know, I think it would have got a small theatrical release, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near what we ended up, you know, how many theaters, and with the advertising budget that Demon Knight had with Tales from the Crypt, it wouldn't have been anything in the same.
But there's a huge but, because of what happened and the way that the rights got tied.
Yeah,
there can't be sequels. And that sucks, because this was a movie that had a whole mythology ready to explode.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you know, it's funny.
Mythology.
That reminds me of a kind of a cool story that I'm sure Cy will remember, which is like Cy's family, his parents, and my family, my parents, nobody has had anything to do with the entertainment industry in any way, shape, or form, or specifically the movie business, or later for us the television business. And I think both of our sets of parents were pretty much supportive of our like crazy, creative ambitions or professional ambitions, which is a separate thing, which is cool. But my dad, I'll always remember my dad of blessed memory, who died, more than a decade ago. After Demon Knight came out and he saw it, I'll always remember him saying something to me along the lines of, well, there's got to be a sequel, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool, because, my dad was 16 years older than my mom. My dad like fought in World War II, and my mom was born in 1940. So my dad was
dad
from
do?
Huh?
What did your dad do?
Oh, well, he was in the signal, in the Army Signal Corps, attached to the Air Corps, first in Imperial British India, and then he flew over the hump in China, and then in the Pacific.
Oh, wow, wow.
Anyway, but the thing is, he was from like a different era of popular culture, and it wasn't like he was a dinosaur frozen in Benny Goodman past or something or whatever. But it always stuck with me and like touched my heart and soul, that my dad saw Demon Knight and was like, "Hey, when's the sequel coming out? They got to make a sequel, right?"
What? I mean, what your dad did in the war is great, but what after the war? What did he do? What did he do for a living? Because my dad was a surgeon, and so I had the same. To my family, this business was a mystery.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's an element of that. My dad's father owned and ran a ship's chandler shop on the South Street Seaport. So my dad grew up like being incredibly handy. He could like drive anything, sail any small craft, boat, fix anything, repair anything, whatever. And he ended up after the war, he basically became like a cabinet maker, and then he did like every different craft job in sort of carpentry and whatever, window treatments and things, different stuff. And then he ended up managing a lumber yard, actually, the biggest lumber yard in the Bronx, New York. Yeah.
My favorite story about Ethan's dad relating to our careers is at one point we wrote a science fiction pilot with like aliens in it, and Ethan's dad described it crazy. You guys wrote a snakehead show. It's like, what? Yeah, a show with snakeheads. Alien guys with snakeheads.
Yeah, I had pitched it to him. I think I pitched it to him. He said, "Oh yeah, it's a snakehead show." Yeah, which was pretty accurate, actually.
What did your dad do, Si?
My dad was a social worker in Cincinnati, Ohio, working on the streets of Cincinnati, Ohio, in the ghettos of Cincinnati and Kentucky. So, and he would drag me around occasionally to work. So, yeah, he was a do-gooder for a while.
Huh.
That was.
He dragged him around so Cy could see how the other half lived,
which wasn't too far far away from how we were living at the time either. So,
indeed.
It's funny. I don't want to jump off, but I want to, because something I remember, we were talking about Demon Knight sequels. Ethan and I actually came up with two. This will be interesting for
Did you talk about this in the last podcast?
No, I don't think we did. We came up with two Demon Knight sequels. The first one was basically taking Geraldine and slightly flipping the script, whereas the first one was set in the abandoned hotel church in the middle of nowhere. This was going to be totally urban. It was going to be so Geraldine is chased to a sort of burnout neighborhood in like the Bronx or Cleveland or
Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn.
Yeah, and basically it was a housing project. And you had the characters, instead of being in the hotel, it was all the characters that lived in this like low rent housing project that were going to be the characters that the collector was trying to seduce and face off the demons. So that was the Demon Knight 2. And then the third one, I don't know the mechanism for it, but I know the idea was that Geraldine was going to team up with other demon knights from the history, from the lineage of demon knights. So we could potentially bring back Bill Sadler as Breaker. There would be like a medieval guy. There would be a guy, you know, so there would be different demon knights to do sort of the final all-out battle against the Collector and his minions.
Of course, the other thing that you guys know as well as we do from all our many years unto decades in the industry is that if Demon Knight had been made as a low-budget, straight-to-video, with or without limited theatrical release initially version of the movie, and then when it was time to make the sequels, we could well have been fired off the sequels and replaced, or even never even hired on the sequels, you know, because it's not like, even though you guys did that to us, not to backtrack to that whole story.
Oh, but why not?
That's what happens most of the time, as we know, you know. So,
indeed.
So really, there's no guarantee, unless we had also been like the directors or producers of the first version. There's no guarantee that it would have been like such a smooth path creatively, even despite whatever, you know, budgetary challenges there were.
But have you ever explored where the rights lie?
Well, okay, this is funny. I literally had a conversation with Ethan about this. We do have underlying, well, let's just put it this way. When the copyright law expired,
right now, the rights lie in the crypt with the crypt keeper.
yes, okay, but in after 35 years, so in about 7 years, Ethan and I and Mark Bishop, I believe, get the rights back to the underlying material, which was the screenplay. And I know there was some separation of rights issue because when there was the Demon Knight novelization done at the time of the movie,
they made a mistake. They dropped the ball and they didn't give us our explicitly written and signed off on right of first refusal to write the novelization, which was in the contract. So they had to pay us like a penalty and maybe the fee on top of that, whatever. It wasn't a ton of money, but at least, you know,
right.
The point was that it wasn't malicious. They assumed, oh, it's Tales from the Crypt, so it must be adapted from the comic books. We already have the rights to it. Because the people who were licensing it and the people who were handling novelization didn't know any better. So that's where the thing is. So we already had a bit of a separation of rights triumph in that sense. So I do believe if we're still around in 7 years, we all might be able to make some sort of Demon Knight sequel. We just can't have the Crypt Keeper in it. So there you go.
Because I've been asked a number of times about Demon Knight and about a sequel and a remake and all that. And I've always said, well, I don't know who controls the rights. I don't know if it's still with the partners or if they had to give it to Warner Brothers when they got the distribution. And I said,
wouldn't have been, or you mean because not to Universal for distribution, or
I'm sorry,
not to Universal?
I'm sorry, Universal. Yeah, Universal.
I think they're with Universal, but maybe they're with the partners.
Or with
like I says,
right.
I guess 7 years down the line, the original screenplay underlying rights, which, like he says, we know are separated or will be separated, then come back to us.
So who knows? If we're all still around, the long-awaited Demon Knight sequel.
So for all, because there is a huge audience out there that has been hankering and hungering for a sequel, And yeah, I think they'll still be there, and there's hope. Hope springs eternal. That blood will get refilled from that.
We wrote we worked on a project with Will Smith a few years ago, and Jada Pinkett was somehow involved creatively or whatever, and it was pretty funny because we said, "Hey, we wrote Demon Knight," and she was sort of like, "Huh." I mean,
it's, again, Jada Pinkett was involved she was there at like a couple of the meetings with us, and she couldn't talk because she was on vocal rest.
So that was the second time. That was the second time. The first time, she was just sort of like, "Oh, that's cool." You know, she just was like, whatever. But I do feel like, again, there was this netherworld where the sort of Demon Knight fan base was just sort of growing and growing and growing, unbeknownst to everybody on some level. And so I think it was sort of in that realm of like, oh yeah, that movie that, you know, that we made, you know, in 1995.
The only thing that you could think about, it seems to me, is if you wrote a new script, didn't call it Demon Knight, and made it different enough so that they couldn't sue you for, infringement of Demon Knight, but by the guys who brought you Demon Knight, then you get some benefit of where it came from.
I guess, but it wouldn't really be Demon Knight. Let's just wait 7 years.
That's an interesting,
till we get the rights back.
Proposal or scenario. I'm not sure about that one.
Okay, wait. Hey, don't give up yet. Okay, it's not Demon Knight. It's Damon Knight. It's Damon. D-A-M-O, and that's.
Yeah. See, I think the point size, from my perspective, which is maybe a little more like realpolitik or whatever. The only real point of size whole, the underlying separated rights and copyright law allowing them or requiring them to return to us in another 7 years is, once that happens, if it does happen in the future, whatever, then we can still call it Demon Knight with a K, because that was the title of the original screenplay. As long as it doesn't say Tales from the Crypt Presents, and like you said, as long as the framing device isn't there,
And maybe in that sense, it might be easier for some studio to make a deal to do a remake or to do a sequel or a reboot, and maybe even at that point get Tales of the Crypt to slap their name on it, because it's a separate deal. It's not involved in the same labyrinthian insanity.
Well, by adding that requires all the people involved in Tales from the Crypt to make some kind of agreement, which is
impossible. You never know. You never know.
Also, I honestly, not to be the Debbie Downer, but I don't know that like the studios are going to be lining up, banging on our door to be able to be the ones who release Back from the Dead. Demon
Wait a minute. Everything has been rebooted now in the last 10 years. IP is IP. Everything is rebooted.
I honestly think you could take the script and redo it and really recommence the mythology.
So wait, do you mean like remake it and start
from
scratch again? Because that to me, thinking again in the like more harsh, not just like shits and giggles POV, remaking it and starting from scratch, maybe that's more legit. But then at the same time, I don't know, a portion of the audience might not appreciate remaking it, and they might just
they'll still come to compare.
Right.
And look, it's the bar isn't like remaking Freddy Krueger. I mean, it's not that.
Yeah.
And have you guys ever gone to Universal to have a conversation about you guys wanting to remake it or make a sequel?
No, I think we've
gone to them about other projects that we did with them.
But we
never did that.
Because we were still moving forward actively with our careers, I think, at this stage. And also really the whole sort of Demon Knight, the sort of Demon Knight fan base explosion is recent enough, at least.
Well, it's in the last decade, it was the 20th anniversary is what really kicked it off. So that was 2015, I guess. But now, that's almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's not out of the question at some point. It's just the question becomes like, well, how much? I think because of the whole thing with Tales from the Crypt, it just always seemed like it was just a tangled web that could never be really untangled.
Yeah, now we're like literally 1 year away from the 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
95. January of 95, it came out. So
crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
Unreal.
And we're all still alive.
Even crazier. So, all right. What hath Demon Knight wrought? So suddenly, Brimstone?
Yes, ironically, I think because we didn't really feel, for reasons explained ad nauseum in the last podcast, we didn't really feel that much ownership of the final product of Demon Knight. When Ethan and I did Brimstone, which was another supernatural show that had to do with the devil and God and mankind and all this stuff, we actually we restole our the method of killing demons from Demon Knight, which is, you know, blowing out the windows to the souls, the eyes. We stole that back from you guys and put it into Brimstone as one of the ways the hero kills the escaped damned souls.
And our defense of that has always been the same, that at least we stole from ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You can't steal from yourself. Who can you steal from?
Did anyone ever point that out?
Not really. Not in the.
No, not really.
At that time, Demon Knight was not. I mean, you know, Demon Knight is not really like a pop cultural phenomenon. So I guess the one good thing about that is we didn't have to, you know, be called on the carpet by all the authorities as we were.
well, okay, let's talk about those authorities, because the horror community, the authorities are really thorough, and I'm
well, but no, that's a different set of authorities, Alan. I'm talking about the studio and network authorities at Warner Brothers Television and
no, I
Fox,
ain't talking about
Fox
them.
TV, huh? Yeah.
No, I wasn't talking about them.
People brought it was brought up occasionally. Remember when that show came on, it was literally like the dawn/infancy of the internet. And I remember being on some version of like a fan chat room or something, like when we were on the air, and trying, because the studio had like encouraged us to engage with that stuff. It was literally in its infancy, it's embryonic, whatever. And there was at least one, maybe two or three, you know, individuals out in the world of horror fandom who said, "Oh, is that, you know, that's like, you know, in Demon Knight," and it was us. So again, we didn't shy away. We weren't ashamed of taking one detail that we had, you know, put into another story and putting it into this one, because the stories were very different. They had to overlap. They had, you know, they shared certain elements, and maybe a certain sensibility, but they were very, very different stories.
Why would you not borrow from yourselves?
There you go.
From your lips to the cinema and TV God's ear.
Borrow from the best.
Holy shit. You know, there were a number of you know, during the heyday of the Broadway musical in the 20s and 30s, you know, certain songs would go from show to show to show.
Circling back to my dad.
Yeah.
My dad came back from World War II, and actually in between coming back from World War II and sort of marrying my mom and, you know, starting our family or whatever, he actually went to Israel for a year right after the War of Independence. And at the time, he went with a kind of in secret with a bunch of young, you know, World War II veteran American Jews in the Northeast, and the Jewish women who they married. They all got married, and then they went as a group, ostensibly to like France, but really to Israel. And then when they got to Israel, he and his wife ended up on a kibbutz up near Syria and Lebanon. And he was there for 1 year. And like I said before, he was an incredibly handy guy. He could build anything, repair anything. And obviously at a new kibbutz, a relatively new kibbutz, you would think that would be really in demand. And when he went, along with the whole group of people, they were all kind of like half socialists, you know, if not full-blown socialists.
Sure.
And
kibbutzniks.
Yeah. And so he was there for a year, and the entire year he had one job, which was to be a chicken farmer. Even though there was stuff that he saw, in his opinion, not being built or repaired the way it should have been. And, you know, he tried to, you know, offer his help or whatever. And they were like, just do what you're told and go far, you know, take care of the chickens. And after a year of being a chicken farmer, he was like, I'm done with this. I'm going back to the Bronx. So
back to the Bronx.
Back to the Bronx. And so he left with his wife, and they actually got divorced. So that was my father's sort of like previous marriage. And it also, from my perspective, it cured him of the illness of socialism. So I would drink to that.
You know, just going back for a second, just to put some perspective into this, when you were talking earlier about pitching and people wanted you to do a certain thing. They wanted you to do horror because you had a success in horror. To add a little perspective, when we were doing Tales from the Crypt, I was looking at directors from all over the world and came upon one director, and I really liked his little movie. And I went to the partners and said, we should let him do a Tales. And he was, what? Who? What? And they batted it down. So I went to HBO, even though I wasn't, they probably could have fired me if they knew that. And HBO said, look, we don't want to get involved in that. We don't know who this guy is, so the answer was no. And I had conversations with this guy, and I said, I really want to get you up here to do an episode. And they totally blew me off and said, there's no way we're going to do this. And that was the beginning of a friendship with Guillermo del Toro that's lasted all these years. But they wouldn't let me bring in Guillermo del Toro to do a Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah. Because he wasn't Guillermo del Toro. He was Guillermo del Toro, aspiring
in training.
He was a Mexican director from Guadalajara.
Yeah.
That's what they said to me. So why are you so interested in this guy? And I said, just look at this little movie.
Yeah.
And they didn't care.
Yeah, we've had experiences like that in our position as showrunners on, I think probably on almost every show. Oh, he's gone again. On almost every show we ever ran, there was a guy. Cy, what was the name of the guy, a young guy our age or maybe even a little bit younger, who we had seen, just like what you were talking about. We had seen a sample of his work, and we invited him to come by our office, our production offices at Brimstone, our first TV show. And we hit it off with him, and he brought us some action figures, which was kind of hilarious. You remember who I'm talking about, don't you?
Vaguely.
And well, he went on. No, Gil was just telling a story about.
No, I heard Gil's story. So wait, who? Yeah. He went on to be a pretty successful director.
Wait,
what did he do? What else did he do?
Are you kidding? You usually tell me all the stuff he does. You're the guy who stayed in touch with him. Are you kidding? From Brimstone, the guy who came by the office, who we wanted to hire as an episodic director, and Warner Brothers said, "No way, he doesn't have any experience."
I'm blanking out.
He'll remain nameless, but he really did become a big shot director.
I thought you were going to tell
Scorsese. No,
it's not. I thought you were going to tell, and this is not Demon Knight or Brimstone or Tales from Crypt related. I thought you were going to say that when Ethan and I lived in New York before I came out here, and then Ethan came out here, we started hanging out in Chinatown and watching all these Hong Kong movies in the 80s. And where this is where you could see them is in New York Chinatown. So we would see all the John Woo movies, the Choi Hart movies, the Jackie Chan movies.
Ringo Lam.
And early on, when we came out here, we kept pushing, even for these straight to video movies, we kept pushing John, like, you got to hire this John Woo guy. He's amazing. He's incredible. And similar to Gil's thing, we're like, are you crazy? Some guy from China? Forget, that's nuts, And then fast forward to a few years later, and literally we get a phone call from Brian Whitten, who, Joel's assistant at the time, working the Crypt, he says, I got Joel Silver, I got Stallone, and I got Wesley Snipes in the car, and I'm in Alhambra at some Chinese video store. What movie should I rent? I said, I know you guys are the experts on these movies. So, and that the irony is that sort of
there's another anecdote connected to that, which always stuck with me, where we were hired to do some moderate budgeted action movie, to write it or rewrite it or whatever. And we were in the office of the guy who was like the head of development at the production company, a small studio. And when it got like greenlit, we said to him, like, listen, you've got to consider these directors because nobody knows about them, and they're all incredibly talented. There's like Cy said, it was like John Woo and Ringo Lam.
Those
are the two guys whose sensibility, whose like cinematic styles seem to us the easiest, most seamless to transition to a straightforward American filmmaking, right? Because one of the things that made those Hong Kong movies that Cy and I became huge fans of so amazing was the way they mixed up and cross-pollinated genres. And even, you know, that would not necessarily translate so seamlessly to the American filmmaking world. But John Woo and Ringo Lam, their style was the closest thing to kind of a straightforward American action filmmaking, you know, very, very high quality action filmmaking sensibility. So we gave him these two names, and we even gave him like lists of movies to watch, or like 1 or 2 movies for each director to watch to convince him. And he had the answer that I just quoted of like, that's crazy. What do you guys from China or whatever? And what happened was we went back to that exact same guy's office like 2 or 3 years later, just on the rounds of pitching a new project, or they wanted to talk to us about an assignment. And I don't think even though I'm more of like the confrontational SOB guy, it just made a mental note of it. He had, at that point, he had like a giant killer poster.
John Woo, the Killer.
That was kind of the John Woo's breakthrough Hong Kong movie that became kind of a cause célèbre around the world with you know, cinephiles and filmmakers or whatever, and sort of like thrust him into the limelight for being hired in Hollywood or wherever else in the world. And he had a poster, a giant poster.
Yeah, 2-3 years later.
Like,
yeah,
dude.
Yeah. Now it was cool.
You realize we told you about this guy like 3
years ago, and you said we were crazy.
Hired him on one of your $2 million fucking movies.
And actually,
$5 million movies.
And the ultimate punchline.
Well, I didn't say that. I just, you know, thought it.
Well, the ultimate punchline is we got to work with John Woo years later. We wrote a action comedy called Bulletproof Monk.
Well, we only wrote it because they hired us. They brought us in. Yeah.
But my point is, John Woo was the producer on that, and even it was a crazy, convoluted Hollywood story because we had somehow we had gotten a meeting with John Woo's producing partner, Terrence Chang. And he was really impressed by us because we knew all of John Woo's movies back and forward, and we had done some stuff. We had some street cred. And he said that I think John Woo had broken out in American films. And I think he was shooting Broken Arrow with Travolta, but it hadn't come out yet. But he really loved working with Travolta. And John Woo's dream was to have a project that would team Chow Yun-fat from the Hong Kong movies with John Travolta. And Ethan and I went back, and like literally like probably later that day, we called Terrence Chang and said, we got a great movie. We got a perfect John Travolta, Chow Yun-fat movie. We pitched it to Terrence Chang. He loved it. He pitched it to John Woo. John loved it. Ethan and I go into our first, like at that point, the biggest Hollywood meeting of our careers, because now we're going to William Morris to meet with John Travolta's agent. John Travolta is going to be on speakerphone from location. And we're going to pitch him this movie because he loves working with John Woo, and we have this project, and everybody's into this. And a couple things.
We were William Morris clients at the time, so it was our agents brought us. You know,
right before we go into the meeting, our agent leans over to us and says, "Now the guy you got to get on board is John Woo's producing, is John Travolta's producing partner, his manager, producing partner." You got to get him on board because Travolta will do anything he says. And if he says something weird during the pitch, don't let it throw you. He's got Tourette's. So, and then boom, this is right before we have to go in and do the pitch. This is a true story, Al.
Fucking hilarious. Oh, but okay, so that's a great setup. Holy.
So we get through the pitch. It's the guy's a little shaky.
But you forget we went in. And the agent, because it was in Travolta's William Morris super agent's office, and he got Travolta on the phone. And Travolta was on the phone. And Travolta was literally on the phone for like to do a kind of a meet and greet, you know, hello, and then say goodbye. He was literally there on the phone.
Because it was like, if my guy likes it, I'll do the
yeah. And you're going to spend the whole time. If I was shooting the scene, it's your eyes. I'm tight on your eyes, looking at him the whole time. Waiting for
him to like freak out, say something crazy.
Speaking for myself, Alan, I tried very hard not to do that. I was very self-conscious. I don't want to do that, but
your head.
It's a struggle.
So this is a long, but the punchline is worth it. Okay, so we pitch this thing. They love it. It's great. We're doing this movie, and this at this point is the biggest project that Ethan and I have ever worked on, right? We're now writing a John Travolta, Chow Yun-fat, John Woo movie for whatever the studio, whatever. It's great. During the time when all this stuff, the deal,
there was no studio yet. It was they were expecting to have a bidding war. I think.
Yeah, slam dunk. It's a bidding war, and Columbine happens, and
but it was literally like we did this pitch on a Thursday or a Friday, I don't know, and then literally Columbine happened like that day or the next day.
And everything they're showing, like these psycho kids that shot up this place, they're all inspired by violent movies, and everything they're showing on the news is The Matrix and scenes from John Woo movies. Oh, wow. And so we get the call literally like Monday or Tuesday. John Woo doesn't want to do any more hyper violent movies for a while. He wants to lay low, reconsider what he wants to do next. And the whole project, classic Hollywood, falls apart sort of over the weekend. And Ethan, weren't you getting on a plane to go?
No, it was, I got on it. My wife picked me up in Beverly Hills and we went to like LAX. Well, my wife and our son, who at the time was, I don't know, whatever year Columbine was, he was probably like a year old or something. We went to LAX to fly to China because my wife's from China and we had this long planned trip. And then that happened. And the next, what happened was John Woo was in Australia actually shooting, wasn't he? What was he?
Maybe he was getting, or he's prepping Mission Impossible 2 or something.
And it was, the thing is, like, I guess what Cy described was on a lot of American television, but it was the only thing on like Australian, TV, because they didn't have as many channels back then. It was like all Australian News Network or whatever, and all they did was show clips, talk about Columbine and show these clips from various action movies. And John Woo decided.
So we were like devastated for weeks, and then it was sort of it ended up being a double rebound for us, because at first we said, okay, our movie got mired in this terrible tragedy and all this stuff, but it is a good idea because clearly we were going to get this movie made with Chow Yun-fat and John Travolta and John Woo. Isn't there somebody else we can pitch it to? And at the time, Richard Donner had either finished, I don't know if it had come out yet, or he had finished shooting Lethal Weapon 3 with Jet Li as the bad guy, another Hong Kong film star. So we basically pitched the same movie to Dick Donner as a Jet Li vehicle instead of a Chow Yun-fat vehicle. Mm-hmm. And Dick Donner loved it, and we got it set up at Disney. Never got made.
Well, then we went to Disney with Dick Donner and Jet Li.
And that's comeback triumph number one. That like, okay, we reset the project up someplace else with a different Hong Kong star and a different director. Then, because John Woo and Terrence Chang liked us so much and had to love that pitch, they came to us not too long after with this independent comic book called Bulletproof Monk, which had like 2 issues made, ironically. And even more ironically, the lead character, the Bulletproof Monk, wasn't in any of those issues. He was like a sort of a mystical titled character that was referred to.
The truth is, there were 3 issues, but they only brought 2 to give to us.
Yeah, there was 2 or 3. Yeah, right, exactly. It was the whole thing. But they said, hey, we love this title. Chow Yun-fat loves this title, and we thought you guys were great. Can you guys come up with something based on this threadbare, really virtually no source material? Which, and this is just a general thing about Ethan and I. we really made our we made our career on doing original material for the most part. So the best scenario for us, if there is IP, is to have the most threadbare IP possible. So we can basically say, oh, it's based on this comic book, but the reality is Ethan and I made up 98% of the movie or the story. Mm-hmm. So that was a perfect scenario. And we got to meet Cheyenne Fat, and we got in business with John Woo again. And, you know, the movie actually got made. And so the whole joke is from this like crazy meeting with the Tourette syndrome guy and John Travolta, and then Columbine, you know, eventually it all worked out in the end. So, and I would say there's one last, I keep forgetting, there's a third punchline, because when we wrote Bulletproof Monk, before the movie got made, the script was a bit of a hot commodity in town for a while. And that got us a meeting at DreamWorks, which resulted in Kung Fu Panda, which Ethan and I...
And it was, you know, it makes sense because Bulletproof Monk had a lot of East Asian cultural content in it. And when DreamWorks was looking, DreamWorks had the title Kung Fu Panda and had tried to develop a movie from it, an animated movie from it for like a year in-house at DreamWorks, and hadn't gotten to a place they were satisfied with or whatever. So it made sense in a way that they called us, because we were screenwriters who had at least some knowledge, familiarity, you know, understanding of the
environment,
culture and the environment. Yeah. So anyhow, so that was a long story, but with not one, not two, but three positive punchlines.
But actually, the destination that we wanted to head to anyway, which was Kung Fu Panda, just to chat about that briefly.
But just to go back for 1 second, I think the moment that you missed was when they came back to you and said, we're not gonna do, Wu doesn't want to make a movie like this. I think you should have waited a couple of days and called back, and we said, we thought about this. We've changed the whole thing around. The lead character now has Tourette's.
There you go. Travolta would be back into the movie. Yes, Travolta is signing up. Oh my God.
I just decided, do you remember the one John Travolta quote that I actually remember hearing him say over the speakerphone? His agent at his like giant, you know, desk introduced everybody was in the room to him.
Right.
And I don't know, there had to be close to 9 people in the room from various, you know, sources or whatever. And I just remember John Travolta saying like, everybody's there for me. They're all there for me. You know,
typical movie star, charming, self-deprecating, but sort of letting you know that he's the most important person in the room.
There's an ultimate humble brag, you know, you guys are all there for me.
I remember when we worked with Will Smith would come into the meetings with a t-shirt that said El Jefe, the boss, and like, you know, he didn't really say, and he was charming and cool because he didn't have to say anything because it's like, he's El Jefe.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Kung Fu Panda, you know, we've talked about this more recently a lot. It's I think that, not to get into the gory details, I think the fact that again, Ethan had been in China, his wife is Chinese. You know, before the 80s, when we saw these Hong Kong movies in Chinatown, I used to love Kung Fu movies when I was a kid. Would go to the local grindhouse. The equivalent, yes, the Cincinnati, Ohio, which is a very conservative suburban city, does have, especially in the 70s, does have really, you know, bad neighborhoods with like rundown theaters that would show all these Kung Fu movies. And I would go see these movies when I was, not too young, maybe like junior high school. So like we had a love of this material. And the thing that I always remembered is that DreamWorks, for some reason, they kept trying to, the inspiration for the movie kept being like these Japanese Kurosawa movies. And Ethan and I sort of were like, these aren't kung fu movies you guys are ripping off. This is like,
and we love, I mean, speaking for myself, and I think
Yeah,
I also
Kurosawa's great,
love Kurosawa
like,
samurai films and other.
It's apples and oranges, you know. It's apples and oranges. So
just didn't exactly compute, you know.
And I think that the thing
they
is,
had literally compiled this huge binder of like reference material in-house at DreamWorks for Kung Fu Panda,
but all the wrong references.
Well,
somewhat. It's not the wrong references. It's just their development team.
That's a little harsh, but not completely wrong.
Yeah.
It depends what you want to take from all of these samurai movies and martial arts movies.
What did they want to make? All right, take us.
They kept wanting to make. There's a Kurosawa movie called Kagemusha, which is basically about a beggar who they basically, I think the king gets killed or the emperor gets killed, and they take this beggar and they turn him into the emperor. That was the movie they kept pushing on us all the time.
The Shadow Warrior, the imitation.
Why?
You know,
just that was like
there's something. You're at a loss.
Well, yeah, okay. It was.
Yeah, I don't know. We had a similar.
No, because of identity. Because it was like some kind of play on identity. You know,
I think the version.
Even though they never, we were the ones. It may seem very obvious, but we were the ones who were like the most unlikely hero. You know, because a fat panda is not what you think of as a martial arts hero. Or, you know, kick-ass martial artist.
The big inspiration for us they
didn't really hit on, which is a little surprising internally, or at least they didn't focus on the comedy / absurdity of Panda doing kung fu. They treated it more, and it may have been whatever one or two in-house creative executives were the ones who actually got the assignment, you know, to like work on this stuff, or maybe it was like the group think from the development team or something, but they focused in terms of the tone, it was much more serious and it was much more grim. And there was something to life or death, high stakes in the story. That's a good thing. That Sai and I thought was a good thing. But in terms of the tone, and how much fun you should just intrinsically have with a kung fu martial arts hero who's a panda, they hadn't really like hit on that.
The two big inspirations for Ethan and I, one was there's an old school like late 70s Jackie Chan movie. I think it's like The Young Master, or maybe it's The First Drunken Master. And the thing is, he's basically the janitor at the kung fu school, and he's the biggest fan. He idolizes all these kung fu stars, but he's like nobody, right? He's the janitor.
Here's the weird thing to me. They had really conceptually, they had 3 words, right? That's really all that they had. Kung Fu Panda.
Right.
And they never looked at the 3 words and went, wait, hold on. I mean, really, it's the most obvious thing, isn't it?
Again,
everything's obvious in retrospect.
I wouldn't be that harsh, only because I think the reason, whether it was conscious or subconscious, the reason that project got onto the development slate there is because, again, consciously or subconsciously, the people who made those decisions knew on some level, Kung Fu Panda, wow.
That's a funny idea.
And I've always said, we didn't come up with that title, and just those 3 words, it's like brilliant. It's just amazing, you know.
You're making a fair point, Ethan, in this, and it's kind of, we have all gotten studio notes from, and the thing about notes, whenever we get them, is often, all right, what the person giving the note is after actually might be a good point. They're just not able to articulate it the way that would be the shortest distance between 2 points. Right. And that often is the fight that we are having. It's all right, you saw something, but you don't know how to put it into words. Well, words that can help me resolve the thing that's bothering you.
I
I've
think
been
the
thinking,
other, but the other version of that we've had a lot of experience with is they put their focus, they put their finger on something and they identify as a weakness or a soft spot or a problem, and they're right, but their proposed, this is what you have to do to solve it or fix it or repair it or make up for it, is completely wrong and makes it 10 times worse. And so then you have to try, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience with this, maybe together and probably maybe individually, you have to try and, find a way to emphasize the positive of the note, which is, you're right, there is a problem. We'll go and we'll solve it, without explicitly embracing their suggested solve, which to them is like, perfect, but which, will make many more problems and be worse than what's there.
I have come to the humbling conclusion recently, and Ethan may not agree with this, but I feel like as a screenwriter, because you're part of this giant machine, right? You have to depend on actors and directors and costume people and technicians, everything, cinematographers. I feel like we're only as good as our collaborators. Meaning, if you have a shitty director, no matter how great your script is, a shitty director can fuck up a movie. I remember one of our first Hollywood scripts, we wrote this really cool, elaborate action set piece set in an abandoned construction site. And it had cool like bandsaws and rebarb and props and guys falling through all this stuff. And the director, who was a lazy fuck, was like, I'm going to shoot this in a warehouse with some boxes. And it was like, what? This is terrible. We like wrote this great sequence, and it was like this lazy, terrible director did the most boring version of it possibly. And then even when you talk about notes, I feel like the best things that Ethan and I have done that have gotten made have gotten through the grind of the development process, because we had really smart development people, smart executives, smart people who, they were trying to make the same movie as we were. That's huge. A lot of these things fall apart, not because people are stupid, but because they have different visions for the material than you do. Ethan and I have one vision for a movie. The executive thinks it's going to be something else entirely, and those visions will never add up. But also, if you have smart people and everybody's making the same movie, and you get good feedback and you get good ideas, then we can run with it, and it's great. And I think I feel like the things that we've done that have turned out really well are really the result of having smart collaborators and, not being cock-blocked by like just dumb notes or dumb people that, and they're writing the checks, they're paying the bills. So we went back and forth for a long time in our careers. It's like, and it's an endless discussion. Do you fight these people, or do you sit there and say, well, if I tell them to fuck off, they're going to fire me and hire somebody else to do this. So at least if I'm going to do these changes, at least I have some control over how it's executed. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's sort of it's an endless process that I think every writer in Hollywood has to deal with,
Well,
So,
one thing I'll say though is that director that Cy described as lazy, he wasn't lazy. He was not creatively interested or engaged in action. And to him, shooting the elaborately detailed, 2-page action sequence that we had written set in a construction site was pointless.
No interest.
And so the first thing that he went to as the easiest, cheapest, fastest, and so I don't know, he could focus on the character and their dialogue, so to speak.
I think he wanted to focus.
There was a little bit of dialogue in there. And I remember he actually said, "We'll reset it." He was Polish actually, and he said, "We'll reset it in an empty warehouse or an abandoned airplane hangar." And we were like, Those are the two biggest cliches for action
movie ever, right?
It's the Great Train Robbery in like 1911, or what are you crazy? You know, I mean, we didn't say what are you crazy, but it, you know, that's where it was. That it ended up being reset. And
I will say, and I'll just talk a little bit more about this particular movie because it's sort of funny. It was our very first official Hollywood job. It's actually pre-Demon Night. And I know in the last podcast, we talked about this Dolph Lundgren movie we did, Men of War, which was our first job sort of on the ground in Hollywood. This predated that by a year or two. And it was a rewrite, page one rewrite. It was an insurance fraud action movie. And it was straight to video, okay, insurance fraud thriller. But we were like, it was our first Hollywood job. And Ethan and I were like, God damn it, we're going to write the Citizen Kane of insurance fraud thrillers. We wrote we totally committed 110%. We had no perspective that some, you know, lazy, disinterested director was going to do this or that it was going to go straight to video. We were just like, we're writing the greatest movie of all time.
Double Indemnity meets Die Hard.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
What happened was we flew out to LA on spec. We had gotten a manager in LA who had read Demon Knight and our two other, maybe he had just read Demon Knight actually, or I don't remember. I think maybe he had just read Demon Knight, and he had talked to us over the phone from LA. We had never met him in person, and started to represent us here and submit that script to try and get us low budget writing jobs. And this opportunity arose, and he got in touch with us, and we flew out to LA on spec.
Yeah, I was like, basically, I got you a pitch meeting, but you have to be here tomorrow to pitch the movie.
He sent us the scripts. He sent us like 2 copies because it's the old days, you know. He sent us hard copies of the screenplay. We read the screenplay on the flight out and talked about what we thought was good, bad, and indifferent about it, what we should do to improve it. He picked us up at LAX, drove us to the office. We went up and we had our pitch meeting, and then we ended up getting the job.
But wait, Ethan, you have to tell the story. We pitched it.
Oh, yeah.
There was a young guy who was like the son. He was like the son of the studio.
The son of the guy who had founded the company. And he looked like a surfer. He was like in his 30s, blonde with long hair and a beard. And he didn't really say much during our pitch, ask us many questions, or, you know, I don't even remember if he ever laughed at any of the comedy or humor we had worked into it or whatever, like everybody else did. And everything was done. And we could tell we had acquitted ourselves well. That doesn't mean you're going to get hired, but at least we had acquitted ourselves well. And at the very end, this guy that Sai's talking about, he kind of like leans forward and sort of like half raises his hand and says, so wait, let me understand this just before you guys leave. You flew out here just for this meeting?
Because to him, you know, this is some grown-up, straight-to-video movie. We're banging out. And really?
This guy was born to a big shot, you know, Hollywood producer who then
he was what now they call Nepo babies. He was
then founded his own mini studio. They had their own building in Hollywood right across from Mann's Chinese Theater and a little bit to the west, like on that same block, and which probably you guys know who we're talking about now. Not that it's like secret or anything. And just the idea that we had paid for plane tickets out of our own pockets to come to Los Angeles, to go to that conference room and do our dog and pony show for him and his colleagues, just for this crappy, in his mind, low budget, nothing, you know, project. It was like he couldn't put it together.
He was like, he couldn't put it together. The movie did get made. I don't think it was straight to video. I don't think it was ever released in North America. We got a DVD copy.
Theatrically, yeah, and it was not theatrical.
No, I don't think it was no released in North America in any form. The DVD, yes, the DVD copy habit is like a Region 12 UK or the Philippines. It starred Robert Davi, and they spelled my name wrong in the credits.
I forgot that part, man.
Then this is the days when you had 100%. You had to be in Hollywood or nobody took you seriously.
But you know what? Wait, Si, I got one thing that just hit me
good.
that I've never thought of because that was like 1991, I think, it was 1990 or 1991. It might have been freaking 1990 when we first went out and got that job. So that's literally like whatever, 34 years ago.
Yeah.
I never thought before, maybe that guy, the blonde surfer junior guy, maybe when we left, he was the one who said, we have to hire those guys.
Flew all the way out here. You got to get a job.
They did a good job, and they actually came here just for this.
They care about this
I
crap.
never thought of that before.
Maybe.
The tone of his comment was so incredulous. It was low key. He wasn't like, what a bunch of idiots. He was just like, you guys actually flew out.
No, I know. It was amazing.
For this.
Well,
and I never
respected your
connected it
commitment
as possibly being positive in the after we left.
It's true.
But
I was
maybe,
going to say,
maybe he's the reason we got that job.
So then we went back to New York, and because we weren't out here, nothing happened for forever, right? For another year. Then we came out again. We got a job, and it's not big. We can talk about this. We got a job, essentially ghostwriting, doing a rewrite, a page one rewrite for there was a very successful straight to video guy named Albert Pune who did a lot of movies. He did a movie called, I think, Sword and the Sorcerer that came out like 3 weeks before Conan the Barbarian and was like a big low budget hit. But he was basically a straight to video director. And he had written a low budget action movie, and he wasn't really a writer. He had the concept, but it had like a sort of martial arts thing. And Ethan and I basically got
also a little bit of a romantic comedy. It was
Ethan and I got the job to
romantic relationship, and also we did this entire job from the East Coast.
Yeah, we did it.
Before anybody lived in LA. We would fly to LA sometimes for meetings or to trying to get a job that our manager had set up. But so we still were both on the East Coast when we got this gig.
So we wrote this. It was like a page one rewrite. And it got made. It's called, and our names aren't on it. It's called Brain Smasher, and it stars Andrew Dice Clay and Terry Hatcher. And I reveal this because
Alan's consumed with laughter.
Because our Andrew Dice Clay plays a bouncer. Terry Hatcher is
the alternate title. There's 2 or 3 titles. Maybe one title is just Brain Smasher. Another title is Brain Smasher, a love story.
Yes.
And the other title is The Bouncer and the Model.
Yes, The Bouncer or The Bouncer and the Beauty. And so Andrew Dice...
We didn't come up with any of the titles.
Andrew Dice Clay's a bouncer, Terry Hatcher's a model, and somehow they get involved with a mystical Chinese flower and
because Terry Hatcher, the model's older sister, is an archaeologist, and she comes back from
batshit crazy. Batshit crazy. But it's fun. And I remember, again, the cultural thing, talking about like the authenticity that Ethan and I would bring. There was a thing in the script where there were these, they were being pursued by ninjas, but they were from China. So Ethan and I put a running gag into the movie where everybody thinks the bad guys are ninjas. And the bad guys keep saying, we're not ninjas. Ninjas are Japanese. We're Chinese. You know, it was like we made it a whole gag in the movie. So... to this day, the only thing I know about this movie in retrospect is that I was in the bookstore and I saw Andrew Dice Clay had written a memoir, an autobiography, and there's actually a whole chapter on Brain Smasher. Mostly he claims that he had a torrid affair with Terry Hatcher on the set of Brain Smasher because they shot it in Seattle. So I don't know. It's a memorable movie for that reason for Andrew Dice Clay, at least. So
it's the closest thing in terms of tone. It's the closest thing we ever wrote to like it's a mad world.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I think It's a Mad World is one of the greatest films ever made. Like if I was trapped on a desert island and I got to have like 3 or 4 movies or something, that would probably be one of the movies I would bring with me.
It's funny you bring that up, Ethan.
but I'm not intimating that Brain Smasher is anywhere in the same league as that movie. I'm just saying in terms of tone and sensibility.
One last thing I'll say,
that was something we brought to it, I would say.
Right. We literally got paid the checks.
Yeah.
Literally the checks stamped on the checks were in lieu of credit. Because we weren't going to go to the Writers Guild. There was it was like a total ghostwriting job.
Our manager, we were already paid the actual fee for the rewrites, for the page 1 rewrite. That was not a lot of money, but it was money. And then the director, Albert Pune, I think he saw the finished film and he thought it was not bad at all, you know. And he really wanted to have the credit just say written and directed by me, by him, right? And so our manager called us and basically, I don't want to say strong arm because we were consenting adults, but I still remember, I can't remember how I agreed to this because it was, if I tell you the sum of cash in the checks that Cy got one and I got one for identical amounts of money, and this is in like probably 1993, maybe, I don't know, maybe 1994, I don't know, or maybe 1992, whatever. It was literally fucking pennies. It was $500 fucking dollars a piece. And I didn't want to say yes because we had actually gotten from the company, they had sent us the daily rough cut.
The daily.
They sent us the rough cut, yeah. And we had watched the rough cut with a bunch of like Cy's apartment. He held like a screening or something. We had like tons of friends.
It was the Citizen Kane of Andrew Dice Clay versus the action movies.
The rough cut was shockingly good. The finished movie, I would say, actually wasn't quite as good, but that's neither here nor there. And the idea of taking even though we were both relatively lower class people at the time, we did not
desperate at the time.
But I mean, we could feed ourselves. You know, there might be like a lot of ramen noodles or whatever, but we were not starving. And the idea of taking $500 in place of this work, having our names on something that I was at least a little bit proud of at that time. And I just remember our manager basically saying, you know, because I don't think at least for me, I didn't acquiesce in the first conversation. But like by the third conversation, it was like, if you guys don't agree to this, it's going to be really hard. You guys, you know, I don't know that he actually said like.
No, I think it was like Ethan.
The way Joel Silver said to you.
No, Ethan. It was more like, you don't want credit on this movie. Trust me.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's what he said to you.
Andrew Dice Clay was on his way down, and it was like, trust me, this is nothing you guys want credit on. It's not going to help your careers. Take the money.
Yeah. And let me ask you a question. And this is probably the most important question for this event. Did the manager insist on taking his 10%?
I don't remember. That's a good question.
That's a great question. Oh man, you're literally like the Borscht Belt punchline machine.
I don't remember.
Oh my God, probably. But I mean, you know, that's only right. You know, whatever. $50 to him. You know,
right.
As a 500.
Exactly.
I remember because that's the thing. I wish for a long time I might still have it somewhere, but it might be in a basement in Brooklyn, or maybe it's in a box of storage paperwork that I have, where it literally on the fucking check stub it says payment in lieu of credit.
Thing, yes.
I mean, we weren't members of the Writers Guild at the time yet, I don't think, so it was legal, whatever. But I just remember thinking like, that's incredible, you know.
Al, you were saying something about the desert island. I don't remember what you were.
Yeah. You know, what I've decided as we've been having this conversation is that this is not part one of two. This is part one of many. We could go on and on. This collective group of people could go on and on and on. So rather than find an end point. There is no end point to the conversation. So it's something that we do occasionally with people who we have on, it's a 5x2. Okay, if you're stuck in either a desert island or a pod that you're being shipped out to Mars and back.
That's much more 21st century.
There you go. But the problem is that the pod's great shape, but the entertainment system is just all fucked up. And 5 movies and 2 songs is all that they had space for. It's all the memory that's left. But 5 movies and 2 songs that you could watch and listen to again and again and again.
Wow.
Five's hard. I can do 3 off the top of my head. 5 is hard.
Go for it.
Well, my go-to 3 favorite movies are Apocalypse Now, Assault on Precinct 13, and ironically, Mel Brooks, The Producers, the original Producers. So those are my easy top 3. Beyond that, I don't know. It's a mishmash of dozens of crazy cool movies, but those are my top 3.
Why? Why those 3?
I don't know. They had the most impact on me when I was young. You know, when I saw Apocalypse Now in the theater, I was probably 15 years old or something. And I was like, I couldn't watch TV for like 6 months because it was such a visually compelling movie with compelling themes. And then you go home in those days and put on television. It was these overlit sets with people talking. I was like, I can't watch anything after I've seen this movie. It just blew my mind. Precinct 13, because it was like, it's action, it's funny, it's suspenseful. It was made for virtually nothing. And I think it was just when we talked before that was one of the inspirations for Demon Knight in terms of like, we can make a movie in one location that can be amazing. I just love Precinct 13. It's just really fun. The score is incredible. It's one of Carpenter's best scores. And The Producers, just because it's like the funniest movie ever. And it's so subversive. And it, you know, obviously people know it now from the Broadway musical, but it had so much legs that it like, you know, it's like talking about something never going out of style. It's like back.
In a way, it never went out of style, not to interrupt, but because this is your thing. But like when you and I first met and we both loved The Producers, which is in like 1986, nobody talked about The Producers. Like nobody except people who loved it or, you know, whatever.
Also, I will say,
it's not
Ethan
like a big pop culture phenomenon.
Right. I would also say Ethan and I bonded also over, we loved the original Star Trek, the William Shatner Star Trek, which was a seminal thing for both Ethan and I on different parts of the country when we were kids. I mean, I love my first curse word I ever saw on television was William Shatner at the end of, I think it's City on the Edge of Forever says, you know, let's get the hell out of here. And I was like, oh my God, he said hell on television. And I was watching repeats. So I didn't even see it when it was broadcast in 1967. People must have flipped out. But I know Ethan and I both love the original Star Trek also. What about you, Ethan?
Another movie, not to launch into my answer to the
No.
I'm saying another movie that we bonded over, I think before we even talked about The Producers, was the Richard Lester Three Musketeers.
Oh, that would be number 4, the Richard Lester Three Musketeers. Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'll pick up from there. So the thing about that, I don't know. It's very hard to do 5 movies, like Cy said, or whatever, although he did 3 with no problem. I don't know if I would put the Richard Lester Three Musketeer movie in my top 5, but it had a huge impact on me as a kid seeing it because it was like action adventure with real world life or death stakes. It was also history. And to me, it was like gritty, realistic in my, boy's eyes, boy who was obsessed with history. It was a gritty, more realistic version of history than I had seen on most of the movies, historical period pieces that I watched on TV or whatever. And it was fun. But it wasn't like there were no jokes. People didn't tell jokes for laughs, but there were even laugh out loud moments of humor. And it, like Cy was saying about Apocalypse Now, it was like visually striking and memorable, and it had its own style, and the music, again, the music was
Great
fantastic,
score, yeah.
right? So maybe I should put that in the top
Your
5.
top 3. Then you only have to name
Well,
2
no,
movies.
it's not top. Okay, the host asked the question, and he said 5. You're not the host.
Okay,
He
all
said
right. Well, you can name 5. That's fine.
Number's negotiable.
But
Yeah.
you could be the host. So wait a second.
Yeah. So probably number 1 for me, and it actually bugged me after the last one of these that we did, that when you guys asked about like what's a movie that you always remember or was very important to you, that I didn't I said Gunga Din, which is one of my favorite movies and would probably have to be on that list, which is a very old movie from 1939.
Cary Grant, isn't that?
Yeah, Cary Grant, Victor
Yeah.
McLaughlin, Sam Jaffe as Gunga Din.
Yep, yep, yep.
I always identified with the villain, which is a Indian leader of
Cult of Kali.
Well, he says called. Indian leader of a religious political movement in India against the British Empire. And he's the guru. And at one point in the movie, heading into the big finale, when the 3 heroes have been captured by his forces, and they're in like a face-to-face confrontation with him, they may have actually taken him prisoner, and they're holding him, trying to negotiate with his army. And one of them, like either Cary Grant or Victor McLaughlin says, or the other guy says,
Douglas Fairbanks.
Douglas Fairbanks, Jr. says, "You're mad." I think it's Victor McLaughlin. "You're mad." And then the mad guru sort of launches into this amazing monologue where he basically says, "I'm mad. They called Caesar mad. They called Alexander mad. And surely Napoleon was the maddest of the lot. You will see what wisdom lies beneath my madness." And so that scene and that character and that movie had such an impact on me that my email address,
Mad Guru.
Yeah, we shouldn't say that out loud here. Even though I know very few people are watching or listening.
But there's
still too many.
There's a sequence of 15 numbers and letters and symbols out of
that's true.
that are absolutely
You're right.
no one could possibly get.
And also there's the specific.
Ethan will be deluged with emails now.
Anyway, so that
Sorry.
Mad Guru is like a moniker that I took upon myself for whatever reason. Because even when I saw that movie the first time, and I was probably like, I don't know, 7 years old or something, there was something incredibly compelling and legitimate about the fact that this guy's the villain, but when he gets to have his say to the 3 heroes, he sounds like they're equal. And then he gives that speech, and then he says, "And I'm going to show you that you all love England. Well, I love India. India is my country, and I can die for it as heroically as you can die for yours." And then he jumps into a snake pit filled with deadly cobras. So, for whatever reason, to me, that was like a very, I don't know. It was
always want what Ethan learned from that you always want the villain, when the villain has their say. If you do your job well as a writer, you want the audience to go like, okay, I hate this guy, but he sort of has a point. You want to get that. You want that element of like, oh, okay, well, I know he's a bad guy and he's killing everybody, but yeah, okay, it's not.
I mean, that's obviously that's boiling it down to a particular essence or whatever.
Ethan, two more movies.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's the movie that I was talking about before that I felt bad I had not mentioned when I did mention Gunga Din is a movie that's probably even closer to my heart, which I actually saw in the theater when it was first released. And I think I was 10 years old because I'm pretty sure it's from 1975, which is The Wind and the Lion, written and directed by John Milius, which is a very odd, almost, it's not exactly a standalone genre of its own, but it sort of is.
Action adventure.
It's an action adventure movie. It's basically, okay, Sean Connery plays an Islamic extremist.
Yeah, that's true.
That's basically the way you could like pitch that movie, which is kind of amazing. But it's a period piece that takes a real historical incident and turns it into a Hollywood movie. Like, I'm the big history guy. The real historical incident has probably 25% to 50% overlap with the movie. In reality, the character that Candace Bergen in 1975, who's an incredibly beautiful, regal-looking, a blonde woman, blonde, sort of like waspy, blue blood, New England American character. The real version of her was a Greek American immigrant who was a guy.
That's the biggest difference.
So it's very different.
The gender thing was a big difference.
Yeah, it's very, very different. But I loved that movie. And, you know, I go back to that movie semi-regularly, and it always holds up for me. And the thing is, it has moments, even though it tells a very straightforward, serious drama about an international incident involving a Moroccan rebel kidnapping an American woman and her 2 kids and holding them for ransom, and gunboat diplomacy and military intervention, and the world in like 1905 on the brink of potentially World War I, which would really break out less than a decade later. And again, it's inspired by real incidents in Morocco. Even though it involves all of those high stakes, serious, historical, you know, drama issues, it's also got its moments of humor. And it also, I feel like, having read a lot of the stuff that was written back in the day when I was much younger and I cared about like film, a little bit about film criticism and cinema studies and stuff, I never saw this discussed, which is that I think The Wind and the Lion is simultaneous content and criticism, because there are moments in The Wind and the Lion when the writing, even though it stays, it never breaks the fourth wall and says like, oh, we're making a movie and this is what's odd or absurd about the story in the movie, or doesn't fit in with the world in 1975 from our story from 1905. Even though they never do that, they do sort of pop the air on the balloon of some of the sort of like, you know, stuffier elements that go along with the historical drama. There's this incredible moment at the White House where Teddy Roosevelt is having this big state dinner, and one of the guests at the state dinner is the Japanese ambassador, right? And John Huston plays John Hay, who was the Secretary of State at the time. And in the lead up to Brian Keith as Teddy Roosevelt giving his big like toast, John Huston leans over to the Japanese ambassador, who looks a little bit like a lean sumo wrestler in a you know, dress, you know, Western dress suit. He leans over to him and he picks up the silverware and taps it against the glass and says, "You likey knifey, likey forky," and puts the glass down, right? And then the scene goes on, and then Brian Keith as Teddy Roosevelt stands up, and or actually, no, then Brian Keith says something about being ready to cut the cake or something, but he gets cut off because the Japanese ambassador stands up and raises his glass of champagne and makes a toast and says, May the wind or the effect of Teddy Roosevelt in Panama, because they have this like Panama Canal cake, right? be in Panama, be the same as the wind he has blown to Japan and Russia, because the Russo-Japanese War had just ended in a peace treaty negotiated by Teddy Roosevelt, which that's a historical aside. Be the same as the wind he has blown to the Far East, peace and respect and the triumph of goodwill. And Teddy Roosevelt's like, oh, and he claps and everybody claps. And then the Japanese ambassador sits back down and leans over to John Huston and goes, you like his speechy? And it's 1975.
Great moment.
It's 1975. And I mean, I was only 10 years old, but and that's not the only moment like that in the movie. But
John Milius, didn't Chuck Milius also do a fair amount of work on Apocalypse Now script?
Yeah,
He wrote the original script.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote the original
screenplay.
He wrote the original screenplay and a bunch of rewrites, and then Michael Hare, who was the journalist who wrote Dispatches, was hired to write
the narration,
voiceover narration.
And Coppola did the rest of the stuff. Hey, wait, I have two songs. But hold
on. Okay, but wait, I got to finish my movies, don't I?
Yeah.
I mean,
all right,
we'll come to your
I'll just list them
John.
without their impacts. Okay. This is an old movie.
You can't talk about your other movies in the detail that you.
No, I just said I'll just list them without any elaboration. I would probably have to put "It's a Wonderful Life" on that list. Is a movie that I love. Is the only thing I'll say as elaboration is a much darker movie than people generally regard it as.
Very dark.
Think of it as a happy-go-lucky, joyful Christmas movie, and it's actually very, very dark. Although it has, it's certainly redemptive and cathartic, and has arguably a very happy ending.
It basically, it's built around a suicide attempt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
So a deeper movie than some people might give it credit for. At least gave it credit for at the time when I was watching it as a kid. And then what else? There's so much to choose from. Oh man. I mean, I did grow up watching a lot of foreign films, mostly on PBS, and probably I would put I might have to put
the suspense.
Yeah, I might have to put. Oh, you know what? I'll put Burn. Burn. A underrated known masterpiece, another historical period piece. So maybe I shouldn't put Burn. I should put something like Swept Away. But
you can put Burn.
I'll put Burn. Well, just because you don't like Swept Away, but that's
an underrated Gilo Pontecorvo movie with
Gilo Pontecorvo, the screenwriter.
Yeah, with Brando, in an underrated Brando performance.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I know this. Here's a weird one. The movie I've seen more than any other movie. I've seen Jaws more than any other movie because it's my wife's favorite movie. And every year we have to, at 4th of July, go see or watch Jaws on television or see it on screen. So I've literally been married 30 years. So I've seen Jaws at least 30 times. I mean, I don't know how many times I saw it when it originally came out. I like Jaws, but it's not one of my favorite movies. But I've now officially seen Jaws more than any movie ever made.
All right, I'm going to mention.
I'm going to throw in one right there because it's a similar story. I've seen Life of Brian 30 times because I'm married to a Brit, and every Christmas we do Life of Brian.
Watch Life of Brian.
Hey, a movie for a while I would have put on the list of top 5. I'm not going to put it on right now because it's just there's something else I want to talk about. But what about Jabberwocky? Do you know Jabberwocky?
Sure.
Yeah, I love Jabberwocky, man. But all right,
I think next
I'm going to mention 2 titles which are recent for me, relatively much more recent than everything else I said, and they're both comedies, right? And they also fit into what Cy said about movies he's seen more than any other. I'm not saying I haven't seen these movies more than any other, but I love them, and I try to rewatch them with my kids who are old enough to enjoy both of them now, which are Little Miss Sunshine and Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder for me may be the most entertaining running time, like consistently entertaining of almost any movie I've ever seen in my entire life. And again, I think Tropic Thunder qualifies as simultaneous content and criticism because even though it's a straight up comedy, the moments of straight up legit action movie power, for instance, one of the greatest. This is the last bit, which is, and also having lived in China and spent time in China, the subtitled Mandarin, what kind of farmer talks that way? A lead farmer, motherfucker, and then blasting away with the two AK-47s or M16s.
I will say, to bring
that
this
moment is pure fucking cinematic.
I will say
gold.
Tropic Thunder is the comedy version of Apocalypse Now. I'll say that.
No, it legitimately is, Yeah.
Beautifully brought around. You want to throw in 2 songs, Si?
No, it's
okay.
2 songs.
Well, I will, because I
okay, if he does it, then I have to do it. Okay.
I mean, that's a tough one, but I would probably say, God, man, that's tough. Like AC/DC is a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll, which has the bagpipe solo, and Metallica, for whom the bell tolls, which reveals me to be what I am, which is a old school metalhead.
Boy.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
It's
say
weird. There's no Motorhead or Misfits on that list, but there's only, if you're asking for 2 songs, those are probably.
All right, I'm gonna go the opposite. I'm gonna go really old school. I'm gonna say a incredibly obscure Elvis Presley song called "Lonesome Cowboy," which I somehow a friend of mine had this single when I was a kid. And I listened to it endlessly, and it's this really haunting song. It's just Elvis and a guitar with sort of a male chorus that pops in occasionally. There's like virtually no orchestration at all, and he just sings about it's a bizarrely, somewhat cliche but bizarre meditation on loneliness.
Lonesome Cowboy.
Lonesome Cowboy. Look it up, by Elvis Presley. And then there's a Sam Cooke song, "A Change Is Gonna Come," which is like the greatest, most haunting civil rights song of all time, which I think I like also because my father was a social worker. So there's something and came of age in that era. So
yeah, my version of that song would probably be Iron Maiden's "The Trooper," which is
of course,
which is the Charge of the Light Brigade historical.
Of course it would be
from the Crimean War. Yeah.
You know, guys, this is another 2 hours. We basically almost 2 hours we've done, and and I still feel like we've but scratched the surface.
We haven't talked about. We haven't talked about our. We haven't talked about process.
No, we have not. We have not.
We haven't talked about being writing partners.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about our Emmy and Golden Globe nominated series Sleeper Cell, and we haven't talked about our screenplay Nottingham that became the Russell Crowe, Ridley Scott Robin Hood movie, which was a crazy story in itself. So topic for next time, you guys.
So this will continue. This is a disease that will not go away. There's no
you opened Pandora's box. I know you must regret it at this point, but you opened
holy cow, no.
We're making up for the last 30 years. Come on.
Indeed we are. Now I'm going to sign off to the podcast momentarily, but hang on, guys, because Gil and I have something we're going to talk to you about.
No, but we should do this next week. I got to go because I got a dog that's blathers about to burst.
Okay, all right. So in that case, guys, thank you again for sitting in. Thank you everyone for tuning in as usual. We'll see you all next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific Crypt content.